The final layer is always the most dangerous to peel back, because once you glimpse what lies beneath, you cannot unsee it. In the classified files I've traced through half-burned archives and testimonies sealed in forgotten courtrooms, the same unsettling phrase emerges again and again. Non-return zones, not abandoned districts, not hazardous sites, zones where return itself was forbidden. As if the act of stepping back into those streets was not only dangerous, but catastrophic. The reason is almost too simple. These streets do not just remember you, they attempt to claim you. Survivors describe how the second visit was never the same as the first. The houses seemed closer together, the shadows longer, the air heavy with something unbreathable. Familiar landmarks warped, shifted, multiplied. One man claimed he saw his childhood home standing intact decades after it had been demolished, its curtains moving though no one was inside. He entered. He was never seen again. And then there is the recurring image, the door, not attached to any structure, not leading anywhere you could measure. Just a solitary frame standing in the center of the street, its surface dark, reflective, as if it absorbed light rather than revealed it. Everyone who saw it said the same thing, that they felt an almost magnetic pull toward opening it, though none could explain why. Of those who touched the handle, only a few returned. The ones who did refused to describe what they had seen, their silence more haunting than words ever could be. When asked if these streets could still exist today, hidden beneath the sprawl of modern cities, the officials I questioned either laughed or grew silent. Yet, satellite images tell a different story. Patterns of erased blocks, grids that stutter and break, neighborhoods where development stops abruptly without reason, the same shapes, the same voids, scatter, red across the country. Some are fenced off, some paved over, some disguised as empty lots, but all of them bear the same signature. So when you walk through your own city at night, ask yourself, why do certain streets end so suddenly? Why do some blocks feel heavier, colder, as though they're not meant to be crossed? And if you find yourself standing before a street that feels wrong, a street that bends away from memory, you must decide, will you keep walking or will you turn back? Because these are the streets where no one was meant to return, and if you do, you may never come back the same. There is a theory, whispered among those who still dare to study what remains of these anomalies, that the streets are not failures of architecture, nor abandoned experiments. They are thresholds, deliberately constructed openings, designed to mimic the shape of ordinary neighborhoods, but functioning as something else entirely, corridors between what we call the real and what waits just beyond it. Consider the consistency of reports, clocks losing time, distances bending, rooms rearranging themselves. These are not random disturbances, they are structural signatures, like the tremors that precede an earthquake. In classified documents smuggled from a military contractor in the 1980s, I found references to spatial resonance phenomena. The language was clinical, but the implications were terrifying. These streets were not being studied for urban renewal or for defense. They were being monitored for stability, as if what lay beneath them might rupture if ignored. And then there is the matter of the disappearances. In at least 4 cities, residents of adjacent blocks reported people vanishing without a trace. A postman, a night watchman, 2 children who strayed too far from a playground. Police reports filed, investigations launched, but every one of them ended in the same refrain. Insufficient evidence, case closed. Yet the families spoke of hearing their loved ones even after they were gone, voices echoing faintly through the cracks in plaster walls, footsteps pacing at night across the roof, though no one was there. The most haunting testimony I uncovered came from a demolition worker in St. Louis. He was ordered to tear down a row of condemned houses, only to find that his crew's equipment would not function properly on the block. Generators failed, saws dulled instantly, even fuel refused to ignite. When they finally attempted manual demolition, the walls resisted. Not strengthened, not reinforced, simply unwilling. He said it felt less like tearing down a building and more like trying to destroy a memory. That night, one of his men walked back into the block alone. He was never seen again. When the worker told his story years later, he wept as he described what lingered with him most, the sensation that the street had been aware of them, that it had allowed them to leave for reasons he could never understand. If these places are thresholds, then the question becomes unavoidable. Thresholds to what? And if we were the ones who built them, why was the knowledge buried so deeply, hidden beneath layers of denial and silence? If you're still here, you've already crossed the threshold most fear to enter. You've followed me into the places that were meant to stay erased, and that alone makes you different. Tell me, would you dare to uncover this truth if it was buried in your own hometown? Would you risk stepping into the space everyone else has been taught not to see? Because the deeper you go, the harder it is to come back unchanged. By the mid-1970s, reports began to emerge of government vans parking near these erased districts at night. Their engines off, their lights dimmed. Men in unmarked uniforms would enter with measuring equipment, scanning the air, tapping at the foundations of sealed buildings, carrying out small crates that were never catalogued. No one ever spoke to residents nearby. No explanation was given. If locals asked questions, the vans simply disappeared the following week, replaced by silence. But those who watched closely noticed the patterns. The vans always left before dawn. The work was never done in daylight, as though the presence of the sun might expose something that could not withstand being seen. I've spoken to a man who lived across from one such street in Baltimore. He remembers the vans well, remembers how the workers wore masks long before masks were common. He said the men never spoke a word, not to each other, not to anyone who approached. Once, in a moment of reckless curiosity, he tried to step closer. He told me the air changed immediately. It was as though the atmosphere itself pushed him back, a sudden thickness, like walking underwater. His ears rang, his chest tightened, his vision blurred. When he came to, he was standing in his kitchen with no memory of how he got there. Hours had passed. What was being measured? What was being extracted from these streets that required secrecy so absolute? Some documents hint at frequencies, resonant vibration, ends woven into the architecture itself, patterns that triggered shifts in perception. Others allude to experiments in cognitive warfare, testing how entire populations could be erased not with bombs, but with silence, with dislocation, with the rewriting of space. A battlefield without violence, only absence. And yet, despite all the erasures, despite all the denials, fragments of truth remain. Fragments that whisper the same unsettling idea, that these streets are not abandoned at all, they are active, they are working, they are doing exactly what they were designed to do. What unsettles me most is how official silence bleeds into personal memory. The more I trace these streets through maps and testimonies, the more I see how even those who once lived on them cannot hold their own history intact. Entire families relocated, yet none of them can describe their old homes in detail. Ask them about childhood bedrooms, staircases, or even the color of the front door, and their words falter, drifting into fragments. One woman, displaced in the early 50s, tried to recall her neighbors. She could remember their voices at night, drifting through the thin walls, but not their faces, not a single feature, as though the place itself had stripped individuality from everyone inside. This erasure seeps outward. Photographs taken on those streets degrade faster than normal, edges curling, images blurring. In some archives, I've seen family albums where entire sections of the film appear scorched or smudged, but only for the frames taken within those borders. The rest of the roll remains pristine. Scientists blame faulty development, the families insist otherwise. One man burned his entire collection after the images began to reappear, rearranged. Furniture in impossible positions, doors visible where none had been. In one frame, his daughter was missing her shadow. Then there are the sounds. Tapes recorded in these areas often carry distortions, low vibrations beneath the human range, pulses that don't align with any known machine. Some describe it as a hum, others as a pressure behind the eyes. I've listened to one of these tapes. At first it was nothing but static, but then, layered faintly beneath, I heard a rhythm. Not random noise, a pattern, almost like a heartbeat, though too slow, too deliberate. When I played it back a second time, the pattern had changed, as though responding to my attention. I stopped listening after that. Authorities dismiss such stories as the residue of fear, the brain-filling blanks where information collapses. But the consistency of these testimonies suggests something else entirely, something designed not just to be hidden but to hide itself, actively, relentlessly. These streets are not just forgotten relics of urban decay. They are machines of absence, crafted to extract memory, identity, and presence itself. And once you walk them, they keep you in their design, even if you leave. If there is a unifying pattern to these erased streets, it is their hunger. They do not simply lie dormant, waiting for the curious. They pull. It is subtle at first, a wrong turn that feels natural, a bus route that skips a stop and drops you on the edge of nowhere, a map misprint that draws your eye to an unfamiliar name. You think you chose it. You think you stumbled upon it. But in the testimonies I've uncovered, the travelers always say the same thing. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I felt like I'd been called. In the 1960s, several psychology departments at major universities quietly received government grants, though none were ever formally declared. The projects bore cryptic titles: spatial perception and human compliance, liminal zones in civilian environments. What they studied, though never admitted, were these streets. Graduate students sent to survey them described dizziness, vertigo, even uncontrollable weeping after standing in place for more than a few minutes. One student who kept a hidden journal wrote that he heard voices from behind locked doors, not words, just low syllables repeating endlessly as though some forgotten machine still operated behind the walls. The journal ended abruptly after an entry that read, "The street shifted when I closed my eyes. The building I marked is no longer where it was. I think I am being measured." He was never heard from again. The university declared him a dropout. His parents were told he left the country, but no passport records were ever found. Even more disturbing are the scattered reports from those who accidentally wandered in during the years after the barricades. A mail carrier in Chicago who delivered to a block no longer listed in his route, who swore the houses breathed in the winter air. A group of teenagers in Detroit who claimed they discovered an entire cul-de-sac with no driveways, no garages, only rows of identical houses that faced each other with blank windows. They stayed less than an hour. Yet when they returned home, the clocks had jumped forward by 3. Patterns like this exist across multiple cities, often hundreds of miles apart. Streets that should not exist, stitched into the fabric of urban design, then erased with surgical precision, and always the same warnings appear from those who escaped. Never return, never retrace, never go back. Because the second time the street remembers you. The origin of these streets is buried beneath conflicting stories, each more disturbing than the last. Some claim they were the byproduct of failed urban experiments drafted by city planners who believed they could control human behavior through the arrangement of space. Blocks arranged in loops that led nowhere, intersections designed to disorient, houses built to exact proportions that mirrored military barracks. It was architecture as a form of psychological conditioning, carried out not in prisons or barracks, but in neighborhoods where families once lived. The experiment was simple: bend the shape of the city, bend the minds of its residents. But others whisper of something darker, something the documents themselves hint at only in fragments. There were military appropriations, construction firms paid with cash that left no trace, buildings requisitioned in the dead of night. Residents displaced not with compensation but with silence, their names crossed out of registries, their properties erased. What replaced them was not housing but laboratories disguised as homes, living spaces designed as cages, street lamps that doubled as listening posts, sewer systems that carried not just water but signals, frequencies so low they could not be heard, only felt. The result was a neighborhood that became unstable, Not in the sense of collapsing infrastructure, but of collapsing minds. Families reported hallucinations, visions of rooms that stretched further than they should, hallways that shifted their length in the dark. Children drew the same figure in chalk again and again, a door with no handle standing alone in the middle of the street. The city dismissed it as hysteria. Newspapers that tried to publish stories about it were quickly silenced, their articles retracted with vague apologies, their editors transferred to different desks. And then, one night, it ended. Residents awoke to pounding at their doors, ordered to evacuate within minutes. Trucks moved in, carrying not furniture but barrels marked with military insignia. Some claimed they smelled chemicals in the air, sharp, metallic, like burned ozone. By dawn, the streets were sealed, barricaded, and by the following week, they had vanished from every public record. Yet those who once lived there could never shake the sense that the streets had not been destroyed. They were still there, waiting. The strangest testimony comes from a single policeman, now long dead, who swore under oath that when the barricades came down years later, the streets were empty, not abandoned, empty. No rubble, no remnants, no cracks in the pavement, just a void where memory faltered, a place where even sound refused to stay. He said stepping into it was like walking into the mouth of a photograph that had forgotten what it was supposed to show. They tell us there are streets we should never walk twice, places carved into the skin of a city where the bricks remember more than they should. These are the streets where no one was meant to return. They exist not on official maps, not on tourist brochures, not even in the whispers of old locals. Yet they're there. Hidden arteries of forgotten neighborhoods, remnants of experiments that were never declared, urban designs etched by men whose names were erased from records before they could be spoken aloud. If you've ever wandered into one, you may not even realize it, until the silence tells you the truth. Not the silence of emptiness, but of absence. A silence too complete, like something vast has been ripped out of the world. I first heard of them in what should have been an ordinary archive, zoning documents from the 1940s, maps with neighborhoods carefully gridded except for entire rows of streets blacked out in heavy ink. When I asked, the clerk shook his head. "Those aren't mistakes," he said. "They're corrections." But what was being corrected? And why were these streets wiped from memory, like scars beneath a surgeon's scalpel? The few survivors who spoke of them described a weight in the air, a sense that walking those cobblestones was like treading on the lip of a grave. Doors without hinges, windows bricked from the inside, lamps that never lit yet hummed faintly when touched. They spoke of an atmosphere that wasn't haunted in the usual sense. No ghosts, no apparitions, just an oppressive knowledge pressing down, as though the walls themselves remembered what you shouldn't. And yet, the strangest part was always this. Anyone who returned to these streets, anyone who retraced their steps after the first visit, changed, subtly at first. Their eyes lingered too long on nothing at all. Their words became scattered, misplaced, disjointed. A man who once logged. He'd freely with his family grew silent, standing for hours at the window, staring at corners that held no light. Another, a schoolteacher, forgot not just the names of his students but the structure of the lessons themselves, as though language itself betrayed him. All of them bore the same expression when asked what they had seen, a flicker of recognition followed immediately by refusal. They would never describe it. Never. Something about those streets was designed not merely to be forgotten, but to consume those who remembered.